Hey, what's up everyone? It's Phoenix here. One of the founders behind OpenTensor, Cons Reborn, just released an important Medium article that explores the implications of dynamic TAO, or at least the logic behind dynamic TAO. And I wanted to share some of my thoughts about it and also how I believe this could impact the price in both the short and long term. I also want to look at the chart for TAO and compare it to Bitcoin right now to determine where it's best to accumulate, when that accumulation phase will end for me, and so on. But basically, dynamic TAO, if you haven't read this, it's about a 5 to 8 minute read. I suggest reading it. Otherwise, check out my TLDR post. It basically distills down the important information. If you're not following me on Twitter, please do so. I have these all in my highlights. If you see, the most important threads on TAO are all in my highlights. And so definitely check that out. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the most important thing is they're trying to do their very best to distinguish this from securities. They're trying to follow in the ethos of Bitcoin. So there's no original tokens that could be purchased through investment contracts like Ethereum. It's completely decentralized. Basically, the miners, the validators, the developers, the consumers are all playing a part in it. It holds value by itself. So it represents something that already has intrinsic value. And that's the same with BitTensor. TAO has intrinsic value. As a commodity, the commodity is intelligence. Okay, so this is important. And the reason that dynamic TAO needs to be rolled out is because the root network so far has been what's enabled the subnets to develop to get to the point where they are. They've sort of been like the parent, but now the parent is needing to wean itself of its involvement for the safety of the child, because we have the big Gary Gensler and the SEC and impending regulations, and they're trying to make it as decentralized as possible, so there's no point of failure in that regard, at least. Okay, so dynamic TAO is actually a good thing in the long term, because what it means is that each of the subnets are going to be incentivized even more so to create efficient, valuable end products that can be consumed, they can be used, they can be sold as commodities, and they can accrue value back to TAO so they can continue to grow their company or subnet. Now, this is really distinct from something like Solana, for instance. In the Solana ecosystem, you have all these other Solana tokens that are launched, and they all use Solana as their highway. They use it, they pay gas, there's transfers that happen on it, there's value locked into it. But ultimately, a lot of these projects use their own tokens. Now, in the case of these subnets, they're not going to have specific branding that distinguishes them, or tokens that distinguish them from TAO, from BitTensor. So they're all startups in a decentralized marketplace for intelligence. And those startups that do better, the subnets that outperform the others, are going to be rewarded because the investors themselves are going to be allocating their stake to them. And that's where staked TAO comes in. So staked TAO, it's STAO. I shouldn't say staked TAO. It's just confusing because the TAO is staked, but it's staked to specific subnets instead of to the validators. So this, again, makes it certain that those subnets that are producing the most amount of value for the ecosystem, and they're accruing value back to TAO, back to the holders, just like a normal company would, right? They're the ones that are going to be rewarded the most. Okay? And so now the question arises, if you're a retail participant in all of this, how is this going to change? Well, it's not going to change anything for TAO, because owning TAO also entitles you to STAO and DTAO, okay? I don't know exactly how this is going to be rolled out because they haven't shared those details yet, but I'm assuming that you'll be able to stake that TAO with the subnets, and then you'll be rewarded more or less on top of the value, the intrinsic value of TAO. You'll be rewarded based on their performance. Okay, so choosing the proper subnet is going to have an impact on your future as an investor, okay, or as an owner, a partial owner of this digital commodity system, right? So we can use that, make that distinction, if that makes sense. So long term, this is really bullish. Long term, you can see that Const and the others, they're not arrogant. They're not comparing to other projects. They're not hiring advisors and paying them $6 million a year like people. Not going to name names. They're not taking jabs at other projects either. Not going to name names. They're just focused purely on making this the most decentralized project next to Bitcoin that also is a commodity. And they're thinking not just 1 year ahead, they're thinking 5, 10, 20 years in advance. So they're laying the foundation for this. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like. We don't know exactly how it's going to impact the price. It may be that some retail participants just aren't into it and they want to chase the next artificial intelligence coin. Okay, they're not in it for the long haul. And that's fine. They can leave, not a problem. Okay, but then there are others, especially the more mature investors, that will eventually enter this space. The institutional investors, for instance, it could very well be the case that the institutional investors are the ones who really drive up the price of TAO, because they're the ones that stand to benefit the most from the products, the commodities that are being created. Okay, so it could be that we see institutions come first and then retail comes later when they finally get their head around what this is. But institutions are actually, it's much easier to understand something like this because it follows along, it follows very closely, not only with Bitcoin, but also with the idea of, well, companies are supposed to create value. And if they don't, then they shouldn't be rewarded for that, right? So right now with the root network, what it's done is it's created certain weight mechanisms, but those weight mechanisms are in a way, they're inferior to what will be created when the general public is to decide based on what they're actually creating. And of course, they saw, like in the beginning stages, they had to have that because it wasn't possible for these subnets to have their own standalone commodities, right? But now it's starting to develop. It's getting to that point where not only is regulation a very pressing issue, but also there's the need for that maturity. Okay, so that's what it's all about, and I think that this is really bullish long term. I don't know the impact of the price short term, but we can look at the chart here, and we'll pull this up here. I want to pull up Bitcoin first. Okay, Bitcoin is leading the pack. Okay, now this is tricky because it broke above, corrected. Well, we got a 17.5% correction, something like that. Okay, so that's not really what you want to see in a bull market. We haven't actually seen a 30% correction since since the bottom. Basically, we haven't seen a 30% correction yet. Now that's a little bit concerning because usually we see, not always, but in the last bull run, for instance, there was at least 3 or more pullbacks of 30% or more. We haven't seen that yet. This was almost about half that. So it's kind of curious to me. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to happen, but it's a scenario that you want to be prepared for because this will impact the price of TAO. And I'll get into that in a moment. Just bear with me. So usually below the 21 EMAs on the daily is a good buying opportunity in a bull market. But again, it didn't correct quite as far as I would have liked to have seen it pull back. The market isn't always going to do what you expect it to do. Now, I'm prepared for both scenarios. The first scenario is that this is sort of a dead cat bounce. Of course, not the final dead cat bounce, but just it's putting in a lower high. And then it actually comes down lower and it settles around 60K or so. Maybe it could come down even to 51K. I've heard this is the max pain scenario. 57K is where the ETF started to pour in. This could prove to be a range for a while leading into the halving. And actually, usually they say the halving is a sell the news event. There is sort of a deeper correction that happens sometime around the halving. We know that. So being prepared in case it does pull back here. But the other scenario is that we get a 3-day close above these highs. These 2021 highs are what I'm really watching right now. If we get a 3-day close above this, and it's a strong close above, chances are it's going to keep going. Because, again, just playing probabilities, historically, this is what has happened every single time. So it happened in 2017, where it broke away, didn't pull back. Okay, and also on the weekly, but we're looking at the lowest possible time frame, which a 3-day time frame is pretty solid here. But you see here also it did it back in 2013. Okay, and then, well, I didn't mark it here, but yep, you can see it here as well. It happened back in the first stage of 2013, first bull run there, and it also happened in 2011. Notice that. Okay, so it did pull back slightly here, but not enough. It didn't come back below the lows, put it that way. We didn't get a close back below the lows. So that's what's at 3 or 4 different occasions where we've seen that. And so it's already, the fact that it already came up, tested once, and then consolidated. We do see some wicks here, so this is rather bullish, I would say. But again, the only concern that I have right now is there could be some screwiness as we head into the halving. We don't know what the inflation reports are going to be this week. It's not a super big deal, but just be prepared for that. Now, if Bitcoin breaks out, holds above on the 3-day, above the previous all-time highs, my plan is, well, I'm just going to put whatever I was going to allocate into TAO, I'm going to put it in at whatever price it's at. Now, if it doesn't hold above, if it gets back below the previous all-time high, 69K or so, then I would expect TAO to actually run these lows. I think that it's been in this really tight range for a while now, a couple of weeks, and it looks like if we drop down on the lower time frames now, we can see it is showing some weakness here in the near term. It's already tested this multiple times. Of course, if it comes back up here again, chances are the next time it really pushes back up here, it's going to break through. I'm just not convinced that that's going to happen right away, because we can see Bitcoin, it's around 70K, and TAO really, if we look on the TAO BTC chart, it looks like it's still coming down in this diagonal value area. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it come back down to these lows here and then bounce. And if that's the case, then we're looking at definitely running the lows of this range here. And this is a weekly range. It just hasn't yet dropped below this 560 area. But 530 makes sense. And then if it did happen to deviate, this is where I said, if it does come back below here and then back inside, chances are that's going to be really initiate the next big move up. Because usually when it will go not only to the back to the top of the range, but it usually gets back above again. And like I said, we've seen this happen. We've seen multiple moves up here. So first test, second test, third test, and of course consolidation here, fourth test, fifth test. Usually after the fifth time, between the third and fifth strike, it's going to break through once and for all. And so I would like to see this, but I'm not holding my breath on it. I do have some bids set down here, all the way down to around 495 or so, just to try and, if I can get a flash crash here and it quickly rebounds, great. From a trading perspective, yeah, I would definitely take a leverage long here. Of course, I'm not going to go all the way up, maybe 3 to 5x or something like that on some of the extra funds that I trade with. Of course, I have a different strategy than your typical investor because I'm also a trader. And so if I can get a little bit extra in here by doing that, great. But it's not where I'm putting most of my funds right now. Most of my funds are in TAO and Bitcoin. Okay, so that's just my strategy. And I'm just, if on the other hand, it just continues and it breaks above, then I'll just throw what I have again. I'll either throw it in here or I'll throw it in wherever it is when Bitcoin starts to hold above here. So that's it in a nutshell. If you want to learn more about trading, I do have courses on my website. If you want to learn about crypto in general, there's Smart Money's Crypto Handbook. If you want a Tangent wallet, they're going to integrate TAO very soon, and it's probably the easiest wallet by far that I've ever used. That is also linked to in my link tree. Those are the ways that you can support me. Of course, you can sign up from XC and save on trading fees and get a bonus, and then I just get half the fees for that. So I'm grateful to you all for watching and supporting my content, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.